How I got into 6 med schools as a non-traditional applicant.
So welcome today to our interview with soon-to-be Dr. Allison Edwards. Allison has recently started medical school in Texas at Dell Medical School. We're really excited to have her here today to share how she's navigated the medical application process and succeeded. And we hope that this interview is going to give you some great strategies to help you on your journey, which Allison will share with us today. So we worked with Allison for her application journey, which included a brainstorming session and application reviews for her personal statement and her secondary essays. And she also worked with us for her interviews. And yeah, we're just very happy to have Allison here today. So could you say hi to everyone, Allison?
Hey y'all, yeah, my name is Allison Edwards, and yeah, I'm really happy to be here talking to you guys today.
Great. So I will introduce myself as well. So my name is Ashley Witcher, and I'm a senior admissions expert here at BeMo. And we are also joined by my colleague, Meng Yang, who is also a senior admissions expert at BeMo.
Hi, everyone. Super happy to be here and share all of this great information with you through Allison's journey.
Okay, so let's get started. We have a lot of fun questions for you, Allison. So we just want to start off with a bit of your background. Could you tell us where you're from and kind of a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so let's see. I was part of like a military family, so moved around a whole lot as a kid, bunch of different schools, all the things that you see from like, yeah, military Navy families. And then my mom is actually a nurse, and that's kind of how I got into my original profession, which was a pediatric ICU nurse for 3 years. And then after that is kind of when, we'll get into it, but kind of when I transitioned and became a medical student.
Okay, great. Thank you. So you said that you moved around a lot and that your mother was in the profession. So I'm just wondering if there was a specific experience that you had when you were younger, perhaps watching your mother, something that drew you to the medical field.
Yeah, so if you go back even further, before I figured out I wanted to do nursing, I was originally a music major. I was in band all throughout high school and absolutely loved it. But once I kind of made it into a major, I figured out really quickly it was something I liked doing more as a hobby rather than a profession. So I had dropped out of school, I think after my first or second semester, and then went back home and I was like, okay, kind of reset, time out, what do I want to do with my life? So my mom was working as a pediatric ICU neurotrauma nurse at the time, and was like, you should just, come shadow me at work, maybe you'll like it. At the time, the only time I had ever really been in a hospital was like getting my tonsils out or something like that. And I was like, no, like I don't think that medicine or nursing or the hospitals where I want to take my career. She's like, no, just try it. Like, come on. I'm like, okay, fine. So I go shadow her at the hospital, and I will never forget, there was this kid that came in, and just seeing like the whole team of the medical professionals like surrounding them and like working together to help save this kid. I was like, this is absolutely something that I want to be a part of for the rest of my life. And then, yeah, at the time, like I said, I really didn't understand even the difference between like doctors, nurses, respiratory therapists, but I was familiar with what my mom did. And I was like, okay, this is great. I'm going to go and I'm going to be a nurse. And that's when I did all of my prerequisites for nursing school, applied and got in here at the University of Texas, where I completed my bachelor's in nursing and then became a pediatric ICU nurse.
Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that. So clearly you are a non-traditional student, so you were a nurse first. And I'm just wondering what the decision was like for when you kind of decided that you actually wanted to be a physician instead of a nurse. And maybe you can tell people if there was a little bit of a struggle, because I know a lot of people might think it's too late or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. I had those concerns. When I say like my junior year of nursing school, I kind of started having these feelings. That was when we were actually starting to get into the hospital, and I was starting to see more clearly what these different roles did. But at the time I was like, no, you know what? I'm going to finish nursing school. I'm going to go out into the real world. I'll like it more than nursing school, which I did. But I kept telling myself, no, it'll be fine. I'm gonna like this. And then once I got out into the real world, I think it was within like the first couple of months, I started seeing just more and more what the physicians did versus what the nurses did. And I really got my heart set on surgery. And I knew that if I went like the NP route, the highest I could really get here in Texas is like a first assist. And then if I really wanted to be in the OR, I could do CRNA, which is like a nurse anesthetist. But I knew that's not where my heart was, and I knew that at some point I was going to turn 30, I was going to turn 40, and I might as well be a doctor when I turn that age, rather than continue just telling myself that I'm going to be happy in this role, which I knew I wasn't. So that within those first few months was kind of that point that I was like, you know what? I talked to my husband. I was like, we're going to do this. And I re-enrolled here in classes for a DIY post-bacc here at UT. Finished all of my prerequisites, which surprisingly there was not a lot of overlap, unfortunately, between my nursing prerequisites and my pre-med prerequisites. But yeah, knocked all of those out. It took probably about 2.5 years to get everything done. And then, yeah, I applied and thankfully I got in, and now I'm here as a MS1.
Nice. So, Allison, you had a singular experience that made you decide that you wanted to be in the healthcare field. Now, it wasn't the ultimate, specific field that you wanted to go into, but it did seem like a pretty defining moment for you when you decided. Some people have that, and others kind of discover as they go. It's not a single experience that helps them to discover their passion for medicine. And so I'm wondering what you have to recommend to people in terms of how you go about solidifying your decision. What do you have to do to really know that this is what you want, and to really be certain that this is something that you're willing to invest the next 4, 5, 10 years of your life training in?
Definitely. I actually, funnily enough, got that question a couple times in interviews, because as a non-traditional student, interviewers sometimes want to know, like, hey, how do you know that this is the thing you want to do? Especially like for me, where I changed career courses like at least 2 or 3 times. I think one thing to understand is that it's normal to change your mind, and it's normal for people to come into school and say, yes, I'm going to be a doctor, and change their mind, or come in as something else and then change their mind. And it's not that the interviewer is like accusing you and saying, oh, you've changed your mind so many times, clearly you're not dedicated. They just genuinely want to know, like, hey, if we give one of these spots to you, how do we know that you're going to stick it out? And it's just up to you to prove that to them. And things that I did to kind of let my interviewers, but also let myself know that this is something that, like, this is the final decision. This is absolutely what I want to do. I did a lot of shadowing in different fields. I shadowed some of the attendings that I was working with in the ICU, but I also shadowed other fields that I didn't know if I would be interested in, and that's kind of how I found surgery. But I shadowed some in like OB, some like in like other women's health clinics, some like family clinic areas. But I think kind of having that in my tool belt, whenever I got to interviews, and the interviewers asked me those questions, being able to say, yeah, like this isn't something that I dreamt up overnight. This is something that I've been focusing on, again, for 2.5 years now, getting through these prerequisites. Just kind of that longevity of, yeah, this isn't something I thought about over dinner yesterday and decided to come interview with you today, but just showing your, I guess, progress in your journey, and that this is something that you're really serious about, just speaks volumes to them.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you put in the time and the effort to figure out what medicine even was. And I think interviewers and admissions committees really appreciate that. You can't know that you want to be a physician if you don't know what being a physician is, right?
Absolutely. And that's, we'll again get into it a little bit more here in a little bit, but for my practice interviews with BeMo, that's something that every single time my mock interviewer would emphasize is just make sure that you emphasize that this is something that you sat on for a while, that you've thought about, you've put the work into it, and that this time you really know what you're getting yourself into, as opposed to with the nursing one, I didn't quite know. I just kind of jumped in. But by doing the research, all the Google searches, shadowing, all of those other things, I think helped me solidify that this is absolutely what I wanted to do for the rest of my life.
Awesome.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that you spent 2.5 years doing the DIY post-bacc, and I'm wondering, especially for some other non-traditional people who are thinking about applying, would you be able to explain a little bit of what that means and what that process was like?
Yeah, definitely. So my understanding and kind of what I got from, I guess, talking to my colleagues at work for a generalized post-bacc, a lot of times universities will have like pre-packaged like class sets that you can take, and a post-bacc just means like post bachelor's degree, post-baccalaureate. And that's when you come back, and it's not necessarily a master's because you don't come out with a degree afterwards. It's just classes that you take after undergrad to advance you in whatever it is you're doing. For me personally, that was my pre-med classes. And because I had done a lot of the research myself, I knew exactly what classes I needed for the main schools that I was applying to. That's kind of how I came in, and my DIY portion of it was, instead of taking that prepackaged, like, hey, here's the list of classes you're going to take on the pre-med track or whatever that the school already had, I kind of got to pick like a la carte. I need these classes, I don't need those classes, and kind of put together my own package that I was able to follow and schedule out for myself over those 2.5 years.
Okay, yeah, great. And is that something that you would recommend for non-traditional applicants to do? And how did you know which courses you needed to take?
So I being an ICU nurse, my brain needed things to be organized. So I had like 1,000,001 like checklists, spreadsheets, everything. My Google Sheets like folder is a disaster, but there's so many different ones in there. So what I did is, being from Texas, I knew that I probably wanted to stay in school or go to medical school somewhere in the state. My family lives in Dallas. So being close to them was definitely a priority. So what I did was I went to like my top 10 or top 15 schools that I was interested in, and most of them have somewhere on their website like a list of prerequisites that you have to meet in order to apply. And if they don't, there's always an email or something that you can email someone and just ask for that list. And I took all of those, and there was some that there's some schools that required like 2 years of calculus or something like that, and I was like, well, that's not the school for me then. But that's kind of how I figured out exactly what classes I needed or that I was missing that I needed to take and put into my DIY post-bacc.
Great, thank you. That's really helpful information for everyone, I think. And so I would like to talk a little bit about school selection and how you ended up selecting your schools. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about that process. And also, you don't have to tell us all the schools that you applied to, but did you apply out of Texas as well? Of course, because there's a couple different systems to know about.
Definitely. So those two systems we're talking about, for anyone that doesn't know, there's TMDSAS, which is most of the Texas schools, and then there's AMCAS, which is the rest of the country. And so typically a lot of people who know they want to stay in Texas will apply only to TMDSAS schools. But I just wanted to kind of spread my chances as wide as possible. This was my first and only time applying, so I knew, being non-traditional, being married, wanting to start a family at some point, I didn't want to take a chance of having to apply multiple times. So I bit the bullet and I applied to both TMDSAS and AMCAS. And we'll talk a little bit more about those differences as well. But as far as school selection goes, again, ICU, nurse brain, everything just had to be super organized for me. So what I did was I made yet another spreadsheet, and I went onto this MSAR, which is something that all of the schools, or basically collects data from all of the medical schools in the country, and it has like their median MCAT, median GPA. I think tuition might be on there, types of students. So they have like columns where it talks about like non-traditional students or students that were in like the military, and it has like percents of the students of the last admitted class, which is again very useful when you go to select your schools. So what I did was I sat down for a day, and I basically went through just about every school in the country and figured out, as far as like GPA and MCAT, like what schools fit kind of my range. There's really no such thing as a safety school when applying to medical school.
Yeah,
It's
it's
something
so
that
competitive.
look better or feel better. But yeah, every school, you got to give your all. Don't ever get in your head that, oh, this is a safety school, I don't have to try. Like, you have to try for every single one. But yeah, that's kind of how I parsed that out. So I had my whole list, and then like I said, I'm married, so I got with my husband and we kind of looked through, and I was like, okay, which of these places would you be able to find work at? He's in tech, so it's a little flexible, but we kind of just figured out like the big hotspots throughout the country of, okay, like if we were in like the Northeast versus like the West Coast versus Texas, these are the big areas that he'd be able to work in. And that's how I whittled down my list to, I think I applied like between like 23 and 25 schools, I think is what I finally came out with. Most of the TMDSAS ones, and then some AMCAS ones here and there as well.
Yeah, I think that's a very thorough way to go about it for sure. And we always recommend using a system where you list out all of the factors that you want to consider, especially if you're someone who might be financially limited, because applications do cost quite a bit of money. So that's something that will help you. Creating that list will help you to, like you said, narrow down to the schools where you have the best chances. So I think that, you went about this in a really strategic way, Allison, and that definitely worked out for you.
Definitely.
And yeah, how do you think your school list number worked out? Would you suggest that that is a manageable amount of schools to apply to? I mean, for example, did you finish all of your applications?
It was more than I realized. So I kind of went into this very much in the dark. I did not know like what a secondary was when I first started trying to do this whole application process. I thought that like all the time online, you'd see people be like, I got what I thought was like 2 Roman numerals, which I thought was like a secondary. No, those are 2 I's, which is like interview invite. So I learned that. But I would say that my sheer amount of school list is good for someone if, again, you know that you only are trying to apply once, and that you don't have the luxury. Maybe you're a little bit older, you're non-traditional, and you don't want to apply multiple times, and just kind of like shooting your best shot with like this one and done kind of thing. It was super stressful. The primary applications were not too bad. Again, I did TMDS and AMCAS, so that was manageable. When the secondaries started rolling in, and I realized that schools could have anywhere from like 2 to like 6 extra essays that I was going to have to write for every single one, that's when I started to get a little nervous. I was working full time still at the time, as the pediatric ICU nurse, so it was a lot of late nights, a lot of days off spent writing these essays. So I'd say it was manageable and doable, but maybe not recommended if you don't have exorbitant amounts of free time and dedicated time to be able to set aside to write these vast amount of essays.
Yeah, absolutely. We normally suggest maybe 15, 20 maximum. And just for students to know, so the primary applications include your personal statement. If it's TMDSAS, then you'll have a couple extra essays, and then secondaries are essays from the school, and they can be anywhere from like 3 to, I think I've seen up to 7 essays. And those take a lot of time. So if you have 20 schools and you times that by 6, that's how many specific essays you have to write. And sometimes you have a certain amount of time, as little as 2 weeks to finish those. So certainly it can become a lot. I'd like to just go back to when you talked about MSAR, you mentioned MCAT. And I'm wondering if you had your MCAT scores already when you were doing your school selection, and if not, how did you kind of gauge that?
Yeah, so again, I learned a lot during this process. So TMD-SAS, you have to, I think the application opens like May 1st and you have to submit near the end of May or something like that. TMDS is earlier than AMCAS. So my plan was originally to take my MCAT in like March, April, and then get my rest of my application done and submitted within like a couple of days of the application opening. However, COVID happened and my MCAT got pushed. Yeah, this is all in 2020. So my MCAT got pushed from, I think originally I had it in March. It got rescheduled to April. And then ultimately I didn't end up getting to take it until I think almost the end of, like the middle end of July. So the way that I kind of did my school list was based off of my practice exams. For anyone taking the MCAT or retaking the MCAT, I definitely recommend the AMCAS bundle of like practice exams and all of that. That's what I mainly used to prepare. But I took kind of the average of the scores I was getting and used that as my gauge for picking schools.
Yeah, and presumably you had done enough of those practice exams to know where your score was sitting, right? It wasn't just like a one-off score. You had a pretty good idea of where your performance was across, a couple of those practice tests. So yeah, doing those leading up to your MCAT exam could be a really good indication of how well you're doing and where you need to study more and what you should be comfortable with. You definitely want to know that before you apply and obviously before you go and write the real thing, right?
Definitely.
So I'd like to talk about your application now. What was the most daunting part of the process, or did you have any kind of concerns about the application process?
I think probably my biggest thing was I didn't realize how much time it was going to take. I think when I first started looking at it kind of in like January, February, and I was like, oh, this will take like, like a day or two to just, fill out these answers, like write a couple essays, it won't be that bad. And then once I started, I really started getting a grasp of like, oh my God, this is a lot of info. And not only just the information, but how to most cleanly and ideally package it in these short little sentences to be able to give the biggest picture of myself to all of these schools that I was trying to ultimately convince to give me a spot. And that's kind of when I started working a little bit more with the academic advisor, my undergrad academic advisor. And thankfully, UT was able to do, like, if you were doing the DIY post-bacc or a post-bacc in general, you were still able to meet with that academic advisor, I think like once a semester or so. So it wasn't a lot, and you really had to like have your life together when you came into her to say, hey, these are all the things I need help with. So my original plan was to meet with her like the week after spring break and get together like all of my essays and figure out how I was going to write these things. And yeah, then COVID hit. So my meeting kept getting postponed, and then ultimately the whole entire university had just shut down for the year. And that's kind of when I started panicking a little bit because I was realizing that I needed someone to be able to look at these essays other than like my mom and to tell me like, hey, are these good? Are these not? And it wasn't until after the application deadline that I had just kept like procrastinating and putting things off. Work was getting bad. I was working in the COVID ICU. I was working along with the pediatric ICU, and things just kept getting pushed. And I want to say it was like maybe about beginning of I want to say the beginning of June, that I really realized, hey, I need help. And that's when I went online and I Googled, and I kept finding BeMo like time and time again, like, hey, these are the guys that I worked with. These are the people that like have the amazing success rates and all the other things. And I was like, I can't go with anyone else. This sounds absolutely perfect for what I need. And that's when I reached out, and I think within like 2 or 3 days, I was able to have my first meeting and really start to get my application process back on track.
Now, Allison, I know that you were concerned about one specific aspect of the application. There was something in your record that made you very concerned. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. So I had an academic dishonesty during undergrad, which at the time, it ended up being this big misunderstanding, and I was going to like appeal this and get it off my record, but I was supposed to start nursing school like 2 weeks after this whole ordeal had gone down. And at our university, if you go and appeal, like if you try to appeal your academic dishonesty, report, then you have to take an incomplete in that class. And I needed this class in order to start nursing school. So I wasn't able to do that. So I talked with the people at the nursing school. They were like, it's no big deal. Like, it's fine. Again, misunderstanding. We don't care, basically. So I was like, oh, okay. So this is never going to come back and haunt me for sure. Like, yeah, it's on my record, but like, it's not important because I'm going to be a nurse for the rest of my life. And yeah, so it came back and it haunted me, very much so. So when I was applying, I started looking online and I was like, all right, how big of a deal is it to have this quote unquote red flag on my application? And I started like reading all of these horror stories on Student Doctor Network and all of these other like Reddit forums and stuff about how, oh, if you have an academic dishonesty, you shouldn't, like, don't even bother applying. You'll never get in. Schools will blacklist you. And I was like, oh my God, like, what am I going to do? So for the TMD SAS application, you get 3 essays instead of the 1 that you get with MCAT. So I had briefly gotten to have like an email correspondence with my academic advisor, and she had told me, hey, so for your 3rd essay, for TMD SAS, they're going to ask you, like, is there anything else that you want to tell the admissions committee? And most people will use that essay for like a year of research or their study abroad trip or like something interesting and fun. She's like, you're going to have to use that for explaining and talking about your violation. I was like, okay, you're going to help me with that? She's like, absolutely. And that's what that meeting was supposed to be for. And so that never happened. And so that's when, again, fast forward, I came to BeMo, and they were so helpful and gave me so much like good advice about how to write that essay and what to say and what not to say. And basically it boiled down to, so yeah, first off, if anyone out there has an academic violation, don't read Student Doctor Network, don't listen to anybody. You absolutely are still a person and still a potential medical student, and schools are not going to blacklist you just because of one mistake that you made. That's all lies. Don't listen to them. I don't even think it came up a single time during any of my interviews. Like, nobody cared. And I think a lot of that came back to how I wrote that essay. And the biggest advice that I can give, and I kind of got from the BeMo team as well, was, all right, so, and I think it's like 2,500 or like 1,500 words or characters you have to basically explain what happened. And so what they told me is the first third of that essay, just give the facts. Just be very objective about it and say, hey, this is what happened. These were the circumstances. This was the outcome. I got a violation or whatever it was. And then the rest of the essay, the last 2/3, you want to focus on what you learned from it and how it made you a better person and how it's going to make you a better physician and all of those other things. You don't ever want to say, hey, like in my case, even though it was a misunderstanding and it was just this big mess that if I had appealed it, it probably would have gone away. I didn't mention that. I didn't talk about that because at that point it just makes it look like you're just making excuses and you're trying to shift the blame. And ultimately, I was a part of it. Like it takes two people for an academic violation to occur. And even if my part was small, I was still there and had a part in it. And that's what I focused on. And I just talked about, again, the things I learned from it, how nothing ever like that ever happened again, and how those learning circumstances were going to make me a better physician. And it's things that like are going to affect my everyday practice in the future. And again, nobody even like talked about my beautiful essay, which I was like, darn, but nobody mentioned it, nobody brought it up. And I think it just came back to how the BeMo team helped me craft that into something where it allowed me to take blame, or take what am I trying to say?
Responsibility.
Yeah, that word. Take responsibility, but also show that I learned something from it.
I think that's really good advice, not just for an instance like this, a red flag, academic dishonesty, but that's the strategy you can use to approach any question that asks you about obstacles or challenges that you faced in the past. It's all about transparency and taking ownership, and then ultimately showing that you grew from the experience, right? Because I think it's unreasonable to say that nobody has, that medical students or pre-med students have to be perfect. No one's perfect. Everyone's experienced challenges, and so they just want to see that you've become a better person from it.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. We really appreciate that vulnerability, and I know that the people listening will also appreciate that as well, especially if that is something that is in their records. So thank you so much for that. I'd like to ask a little bit now about the rest of the primary application. So you did your personal statement and your activity sketch as well. Just wondering if you can share anything about that process with us. How did you come up with what you would include for both of those? And how did you kind of go through the writing process for those?
Yeah, so I think it was during my brainstorming session with BeMo that we really kind of started talking about, like, what is the theme basically going to be for my application? And I think that was kind of really helpful in and of itself, was just like, hey, what's your focus going to be? Like, how are we going to write this? What's the style going to be? Just to create an element of consistency throughout. That way, one activity session, I wasn't necessarily saying, like, speaking as if I was speaking off my CV, and then another one, I was telling this exorbitant story, but kind of creating, again, a level of consistency that makes it easy for the reader to be able to kind of work their way through. Because at the end of the day, I think one thing that helped me a lot was being able to think about who was going to be reading this application, and it's going to be these people that are sitting around a desk or sitting around a table and just going through massive numbers of applications every single day. And the easier and more digestible that you can make it for them kind of like gives you a little bit of a win in your corner. And as far as the activities go, my BeMo expert told me, like, hey, sit down with yourself in a room and just write down like everything that you've done. Write down any volunteering experiences, write down like any athletics you're involved in, any volunteer stuff, like literally anything. Just write it all down. Even if you don't think that it's important, sometimes by writing it down, it can spark other memories of like other things you've done. And one thing I wish I had done, if you are just now starting on this pre-med journey, just get like a journal, and anytime you volunteer for something, anytime that you like have something published or do a project, like just write down like what you did and just like a little blurb about it so that you have something to come back to for later. But I did that, and then I sat down, talked with my friends, talked with my husband, and I was like, hey, what have I done? Like, if you like, what things not on this list can you think of? And like their input, I called my mom. I was like, hey, just out of curiosity, do you know anything I've done that's like not on this list? And surprisingly, there was a lot of stuff that I was like, oh shoot, I completely forgot about that. But kind of, I guess, talking to like your own panel of people and getting their input as well, because sometimes things that seemed so mundane or like not exciting to me that I didn't even remember were things that really stuck out in their minds and were things that ended up making their way into my final application. But I think that that was kind of my first step for getting together everything that was going to be a part of my activity section.
I think that one challenge people have with the activity sketch is the limited space that you have to work with. And this is true no matter what system you're applying to, no matter what application. Like, this is the part where you have so much to say about what you want to include and so little space to say it. So what advice can you give to students who might be struggling with this?
Yeah, so if you're applying TMD SAS, I apologize. It's an absolute nightmare trying to fit an entire activity story into like, I think it's like 250 characters or something like that. But my BeMo expert, bless their hearts, when I first sent my first draft to them, they were like, hey, Allison, like, I understand that you were a nurse tech, but in your description, you basically tell me what a nurse tech does, even though like everyone reading your application knows that a nurse tech is responsible for taking care of patients and maintaining patient safety. Like, if you can find it in the job description on like Indeed or LinkedIn, like, you probably, that doesn't belong in the explanation of your activity. If it's something that, I guess, like, again, think to your audience. Everyone reading your admissions paper is going to be familiar with like what a scribe does, what a nurse tech does, what those kind of more like more obvious things that we see every day in healthcare. So for those ones, what my BeMo expert recommended was saying, like, basically break for the TMD SAS one, break it down in like 2 little sentences. The first one, if you need to explain a little bit about it or talk a little bit more in depth about like some responsibilities that people may not know. Like, for instance, when I was a nurse tech, I was a BLS instructor. So that was part of my job description that highlighted things like leadership, organization. So I was able to put that in there. And then the second sentence, you want to talk or kind of give your reader insight to how this is going to be beneficial as a medical student and even in your future as a physician. So for that particular one, I was able to say, like, I was a nurse tech. I took care, or these were my responsibilities in terms of like I took care of up to 12 patients, and I was also a BLS instructor. And then in the second sentence, I was able to say, doing this taught me things like leadership, taught me how to manage multiple responsibilities at once, and just kind of saying those things, which then lets your reader interpret further, like, oh, okay, they were able to handle multiple responsibilities at once, then they will probably make a good medical student because medical students have to handle multiple responsibilities at once. And it's not necessarily that you made that connection for them, but you left the breadcrumb trails or the breadcrumb trail there for them to conclude that themselves. Like, these are smart people. They're going to be able to figure it out without you explicitly telling them.
So you were, concise with the responsibilities portion, which is still important for some of those activities. But then you included information that would allow the reader to extract the traits and the characteristics that are extremely valuable for anyone who is going to be a physician or medical student. Right?
Exactly. So instead of saying, I learned how to be responsible, you give examples of instances in which you were responsible.
And for some activity sketches, you do have the option of highlighting a couple of the activities that were more meaningful or impactful to you, such as the 3 meaningful experiences in the MCAT sketch. How did you go about choosing those? What were the factors you were considering?
So at first, I was really tempted. I had like 3 main things, like being a nurse tech, and like I think something else that had to do with medicine. So at first, I was really tempted to make those my big 3, because I'd be like, look what a good medical student I would be. My entire life is medicine. But after talking to my BeMo person, we really kind of started to figure out that, like, yes, being a nurse was definitely like one of my big 3, but those other 2, like, were not, yes, they were meaningful, but I kept talking about some of these other things a lot more than those two. It's just that these other things, which were the music aspect from back when I was a music major early on, and being an athlete here at Texas, were things that I could talk a whole lot more about on, and just had a lot more, again, meaning behind them, as opposed to maybe some of my other like medically focused volunteer stuff or medically focused like the tech job early on. And these ones I was just so much more passionate about, and it really came out a lot during that brainstorm session. And that's when they kind of convinced me, and they were like, hey, you want to talk about the 3 big things on your application that if someone asked you about, you could literally go on for like minutes, hours about, not just give your description and like what you did and, oh, look at all the things I learned. But by talking about the things you're passionate about, it really it comes out in your words, and it really starts to paint you as more of a human being rather than just another application that they're having to read. And I think by having things on there that weren't medically focused, again, gave that reader something to break up the mundane, almost forced applications that they might be going through. And again, paint you as a human being and make it be someone that they wanted to talk to again and like learn more about. And that's another thing that's super important for these applications, is you want your reader to want to know more about you, and that's how they extend an invitation for an invite or for an interview for you.
I think that another thing about being diverse about your experiences is that the skills and traits that would make you a good professional are not only obtained and learned in medically related experiences, right? I'm sure you in your athletics, you learned to be a team player, of course. You learned to collaborate with other teammates and encourage them. And so I think it's important for applicants to see their experiences and to be able to see for themselves what traits are translatable, what characteristics are translatable. So that's really awesome. And I think by highlighting those other aspects, you definitely probably made yourself stand out as a candidate, which you want to do because, gosh, there's so many applications that come through to every single school, thousands. Some schools get over 10,000 applications in a cycle, which is just insane. And so you have to do everything you possibly can to showcase that you are different and you are the best candidate for that school.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we've talked about the primary applications, I'd like to talk about the secondaries. And as we mentioned, these come later usually, and there can be a quick deadline, and often there are lots of questions. So let's say, you said that you applied to maybe about 23 schools, is that correct? Okay, 23 schools. Let's say anywhere from 3 to 7 questions per school. It's a lot of questions. How did you go about figuring out which ones you were going to submit first, which questions you were going to answer, because sometimes they overlap? Maybe you could share a little bit of that process for our listeners.
Yeah, definitely. I think, again, ICU nurse brain, so a lot of this, again, take what works for you, take what doesn't. This is the particular system that worked really well for me. I had like this blank wall in my bedroom that I basically put up like all of these sticky notes of all the schools I was applying to, and like had them ranked in terms of like, if I got into this one, this is the one that I want to go to most, and like this is kind of near the bottom of my list. And that just gave me kind of a visual representation as these secondaries were rolling in, of like, okay, I got like 6 secondary packages today. I'm going to knock out like the one that I want to go to most first. Because again, this is, I'm sure we've all heard it before, this is a rolling admissions process, which means that like as applications are coming in, they're accepting people. So like acceptances start going out like I think as early as like early fall. So even those people that haven't finished their applications in like December, like those ones are still coming in and acceptances are going out. So it's super important to try to get as close to the top of that pile as possible, but don't rush it to the point where you're not putting in your best work. So my particular method of organization was, I had yet another spreadsheet where I had all of my schools, and I had like different common secondary questions kind of in like a row at the top. Things like why this medical school, or talk about a time you had a challenge or had to overcome a challenge, or like what do you possibly see yourself going into in the future, like what are your passions. Like some of those more common secondaries I was able to like put at the top, and then any school that had that essay, I just like colored that box in. So it gave me a really pretty kind of graphic of, okay, if I finish, if I write one essay for talk about a time you overcame a challenge, then I'm going to be able to submit it to all of these schools. And that's another thing that nobody told me at first, and I kind of had to figure out for myself was, oh my God, do not write a different essay for every school. Your talk about a time you had to overcome a challenge essay, you can submit like a slightly altered version of that to every school. Just make sure that before you submit it, like go in, make sure you don't have like some other school's name in there or something. And sometimes if you want to like tweak it just a little bit to highlight things that seem super important to that school, which you can find by going to their website, like looking at their mission and like a brief 5-minute browse through their website, their most important values and goals will jump out at you. So if you want to tweak the essay just a little bit, maybe to like highlight things that are important to that school, like definitely do that. But overall, the general same essay can be submitted to every school with that prompt. So my method was, I think I basically, as they were rolling in, like talk about a time that you had a challenge was probably the most common one. So that's the essay that I wrote first. And I was like, okay, I can submit it to like 17 schools. Awesome. And then I was able to like look linear, like across the rows and see, okay, so this school had that one that was talk about a time that you had a challenge, and it only has one other essay that I'll need to write. So let me go ahead and knock that out. And kind of by going through this process, and like whenever I wrote that one, I was like, oh, this particular essay of talk about a time that you demonstrated leadership, say, can also be applied to like these schools. And then just kind of crossing off the boxes in a methodical yet chaotic way was the best way that I found to do it. And again, do whatever works best for you, but this isn't one that I was able to kind of, number one, prioritize the schools that were most important to me, and also finish the highest number of secondaries or the highest volumes in the shortest amount of time possible. And a lot of times you see like the unofficial 2-week deadline thing where, oh, if a school sends you a secondary, get it in within 2 weeks. That's ideal. Just because you submit it like 2.5 weeks or 3 weeks later doesn't mean they're not going to look at it. But if you really want to show this school that they're important to you, and that if they extend an acceptance to you, you're more likely to take it, by getting in the secondary as soon as possible while maintaining like clarity and excellence of work and everything, really shows them that, hey, you're a priority to me. Like, I really want to go to your school.
I think that, a different method maybe works for different people. Yours is something that worked for you, but I think the advice that you gave about, not writing different essays when it's really the same question for multiple schools is a really good one to help you to not get overwhelmed and stay on track. But one question that a lot of schools ask is a question that you can't do that for, and that's the why our program, why our school question. So how did you go about navigating that one?
Yeah, that one's, I didn't like that one a whole lot because I couldn't use it for every school. That's the one that I probably had to put the most work in. It's like deceptively simple, and it's like, why our medical school? Oh, because you're a medical school. Like, no, you have to go in and you want your essay. And the key thing for this one is you want to make it obvious to the school that this is not an essay that you could have sent to any other school. And the way, so what I mean by that is don't submit this and say, hey, I want to go to your school because you your clinicals are awesome and I think you have a cool hospital and you teach your students medical things. Like, don't you like pursue excellence in everything you do. I came across a lot of essays that had that. And if it's a phrase that can be applied to like 90% of the schools on your list, see if you can make it more personable. Not necessarily that it's leave that out completely, but may add something to that statement that makes it personally identifiable to the admissions person that's reading it, their school. And the biggest, I guess the simplest way to do this is to go onto the school's website, and they'll all have like a tab or something that says our mission and our values, and start there and just kind of start digging throughout the website, and see like, hey, do they have like a new anatomy lab that they're super proud of? And whatever schools are proud of, they're gonna brag about it. Do they have like a certain professor that like has all of these like world-renowned, I don't know, publications or something? Do they have an emphasis on public health and there's this particular class that you really want to take? Or some schools have like a space medicine program, which I think is so cool. But no, again, those are things that not everyone has. And being able to talk to those aspects, I think, is a really, really, really strong start. If you want to go like super above and beyond, one thing that I did for the schools that were at the very top of my list, I was lucky in that I either had friends or friends of friends that had either gone to that school or were like familiar, like intimately familiar with the program, or like their spouse was going to school there or something. So I was able to ask them out for coffee and just say, hey, can I ask you like some cool things about the school? And the students and the faculty will always be able to tell you things that are not on the website. And being able to talk about those things are also aspects that can show your reader like they know what's on the website for the most part, and they can see like, hey, this person really went above and beyond for our school, because like I know they didn't do this for every single one, but they went above and beyond for our school, so they are really dedicated and they really, really want to come here.
And I think that when you've collected all your information about what is unique about that school, generally you want to be a little bit selective too about what you actually end up writing about, because hopefully those things are aspects of the school that you can actually connect with, that you maybe can contribute to. I'm wondering if you did that in your essays.
I did. I think, like you said, it's super important to not have just like a list of everything that you learned about the school, because that's also not impressive for your readers. They're like, oh, this person knows all these things, but like, what are they going to do with them? Why does this matter? So again, kind of going back to what we talked about in my brainstorming session, was having like that theme for my application. So I picked aspects about the schools that kind of highlighted, again, back to kind of consistently what I kept talking about through my personal statement, through my other essays, through all of my activities and stuff. And by keeping it down to like maybe 2 to 3 aspects for that secondary, and really going into depth and showing your passion for why that particular thing about that one particular school is so important to you, really makes you stand out more, rather than, again, just having like a laundry list of here's how all the things I know about your school.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
Yeah, me as well. And that's great advice to give to everyone who thinks, well, I did all this research, so I want them to know that I know a lot. And really, it's making that connection, right? So these are the 2 to 3 things I want to talk about, and then this is how I see myself contributing to those aspects. So really great advice. I'd like to move on now to CASPer. And I know that you did CASPer, and for those who are not familiar with it, it's a written situational judgment test, and it's used by many medical schools to assess your non-cognitive attributes and essentially gauge your suitability for the medical profession. I'd like to ask if you had known what CASPer was going into it. Did you even know that you had to do CASPer? And maybe a little bit of how you prepared for that.
Yeah. So I had no idea what CASPer was. I think it's something that a lot of schools use that I feel like and maybe it was just my particular Google searches or something that I did, but I feel like it's not talked about very much at all. And I think it's because it's a test that you can't necessarily like study for, quote unquote. And everyone's like, oh, you can just go in and take it. So I had no idea what it was. I didn't even know I had to take it. I got an email one day that was like, you like sign up for your CASPer test or whatever. And I almost deleted it because I thought it was from like the mattress company, like from mattress or something. And then I saw it had like my full name or something on there. I was like, ah, well, this is weird. Let me click on this. And I was like, oh my God, this is like, this is important. Don't do what I do, like do your research. But I was like, oh my God, so I guess I have to take this now. And I, again, couple Google searches later, figured out what it was for. They have on the CASPer website, they have like a practice test that you can take. And that's pretty much the only preparation I did for it. But in retrospect, if I could go back, some of the prep that I would have done is there are like different types of questions that they can answer you. There's like policy questions, there's more ethically based questions, there's what would you do questions. There's these different categories that even though you don't know what the situation that they're going to present you with is, and you don't know what the question is or what it's going to be asking, they can fit into these categories, and you can kind of have like a template in your head of, if I get a policy question, these are the 3 bullet points of like, I want to address, I forget what they are, like address like what this policy means, why it's important, who it affects, or something like that. But by having a little bit of, not necessarily studying, but preparation, you can not only know what you're doing, but also make yourself kind of stand out as an applicant in that aspect as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and by having those structures in mind, as you said, for policy questions, the ones that put you in a situation, like what would you do, scenario questions is what we call them, you can also be able to put more on the page than otherwise. If you're sitting there for the first 30 seconds thinking about what you should say, you already know that, and you're just filling in the content based on the prompt that you're actually given, right? So I think a stressful part about CASPer for a lot of students, and I don't know if this stressed you out, Allison, is just the time limit that you have for each set of questions. It's not even just one question. You have 5 minutes to answer 3 questions. And it's not to say that you have to answer all 3. You don't, but it can definitely take a lot of the burden and the stress off of you if you have these strategies prepared and practiced before going into the actual test. So that's really good advice for the next person who may not have been thinking about CASPer until now.
Yeah, it's a thing. Definitely a thing, not just a mattress company.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just for the listeners, I believe that you only had the CASPer written test, but they've also added a snapshot, which is a video where they might ask you personal questions, questions that you could receive in any interview, and something called Duet. And that's basically matching your values to the values of the medical school. So it's a really good idea to check the website to see if any of the programs that you're applying to actually do include CASPer, and check your emails regularly, and even your spam folder for any of those. Okay, so I'd like to now talk about the interviews, which I think is one of the most exciting parts of all of this. So I wanted to know, where were you when you got your first interview invite, and how long after your application was this?
Yeah, so I was just at home, and I remember I opened my phone and I was not expecting it. I think I was going to check like Instagram or something, and saw in my email. I was like, oh my God. My husband comes in, he's like, are you okay? Because I guess I screamed like I was like in pain or something. And I'm like, no, I got an interview invite. After you submit your application, you have to go back and manually send your MCAT scores to those schools. They automatically send to AMCAS, but whenever for TND SAS, they're special. They need like you to go in and like click on the schools I think you do it from like the MCAT website. You have to click the TMDSAS schools to send those scores. So I did not know this. I had no idea that this was even a thing. So I had already submitted my application pretty quote unquote late, not within the first few days of the cycle opening like I had planned to, just due to kind of everything like COVID, procrastination, what have you. I had already submitted late, and then I came to find out that my application for TMDSAS never actually got submitted because I didn't send my MCAT scores. So I did not, don't do what I did. I ended up not submitting my full application until close, I want to say like mid-August or so. And then the other thing I didn't realize is it has to go through this like verification process, which can take like, I think it's like 4 to 8 weeks or something after you hit submit for them to go through, like check everything. I think they look maybe at like the grades you submitted and stuff. And then after that point is when they actually can like start reading and sit around a table and look at your application. So it was a long time until I got my first application or my first interview invite. I think it was, so yeah, I had submitted, and then like 48 weeks later, I think it was like 2 weeks after my final like verification, that I got my first invites. And one thing that I wish that I had done that I didn't think about was start preparing for interviews before you even get an invite. Because for me, I got my verification. I was like, surely I'm not going to hear back for, like a month or two. I'll start preparing later. Again, procrastinate some more. And that first interview invite showed up, and of course it was a moment of excitement, but then it was a moment of, oh my God, the reality set in. I was like, someone's going to be deciding my future, potentially going to go to their medical school in 2 weeks, and I haven't even started. I don't even know how this works. So it was at that point that I kind of like went into high gear, and some of the things that I used to prepare were, again, a lot of Google searches, just trying to figure out, all right, structure of the interview, because there's these different kinds that they can do. They can do like a panel interview. Some schools do that where it's like a group of people interviewing you. Some schools just do like a simple one-on-one. Some of them have like quote MMI stations, which is like the multiple mini interview stations, which is similar to CASPer and similar to the snapshot thing, where they give you a scenario that can have nothing to do with medicine and ask how you would respond to that. And yeah, I finally figured out like, okay, for this school, this is the type of interview they use. They use the traditional like one-on-one interview that I think I did with like 3 different people or 2 different people.
What was the most unique interview format you had?
Yeah, so let me, hold on, I need to plug in my computer real quick. We're dying a little bit. There we go. Yeah, so the most unique interview format I had was at Dell Medical School. They are a newer school here in Austin, Texas, and their interview process, or their interview day, they have 3 different kinds of interviews. And the first interview is like the traditional one-on-one, talk to a person for like 30 minutes and have them ask you all of the, the usual questions, which every interview is going to ask you, like why do you want to do medicine / why do you want to go to this school, and tell me about yourself. And for those 2, quick side notes, I think for those 2, the most important thing that you can do is be able to concisely tell them, like for the tell me about yourself question, concisely like give a little bit of your backstory, a little bit about kind of yourself, but then also kind of have like certain bullet points of like, again, interesting things that you would like to talk about. Because what a lot of interviewers will do is they will take from your tell me about yourself question, where I would say, I am a nurse, I was a student athlete, and I like the latest hobby I picked up was woodworking. And they would take information from that question and kind of derive the rest of their questions, kind of going off of that in like a conversationalist style rather than question, answer, question, answer. So by kind of, again, giving them breadcrumbs, giving them easy things to be able to latch onto, you almost are in more control of how your interview is going to go, rather than if you're just like, hi, my name is Allison, I'm a nurse, and that's it. But by going into a little bit more detail, but kind of leaving almost these little cliffhangers of them saying, oh, I really want to know more about that, you can have preparations for those further questions that you might suspect that they might ask you next. But yeah, so that was those two. And what I did is I just had like a little sticky note on the side of my computer that kind of gave me a really brief outline of, hey, this is kind of what you're going to talk about. That's not cheating. You can't cheat in an interview. But kind of helped me in those moments of being really nervous to not completely like brain fart and forget everything I was going to say. But then, yeah, so that was the first interview. The second interview that they do is the multiple mini interview, and they actually incorporate this in like a video, or they incorporated it into like a video series, because I did all of my interviews on Zoom. I think when they do them in person again, they might have like different stations that you go to. It'll all depend on what happens when we come out of this. But yeah, so for me, it was very similar to like CASPer, except just with an oral response rather than typing. And then the last station, or the last interview, was a group interview, which I don't know. I think there's maybe one or two other schools in the country that do this, but they put you in a group with like 5 or 6 of the other people that are also interviewing that day. And it's really to assess and see like, how do you work in a group? How do you come to answers? And basically they present the group with a problem, and it's to watch and see like, again, how you work in a group, how you work with others, how you process problems, and all of those other things. And I really appreciated that interview style, because I think those 3 as a whole really encompass a lot more of who you are as a person, rather than, again, just that question answer style, and also kind of vet how well you're going to do, like in an actual med school setting, not just interviewing as if you were going to be taking a job somewhere.
Yeah. So prepping for that kind of interview where it's a hybrid of a couple of different types, how did you do that? Because that probably didn't look like handing someone a mason jar and asking them to pick out a question.
Yeah, for the MMI, I prepped how I should have prepped for CASPer. And basically, because there's not a whole lot of, I guess there's some MMI resources online, but I kind of used a combination of MMI resources and CASPer resources to figure out, again, those different types of questions, the ethical, the policy, the what would you do questions. I would like set up my phone or my laptop and record myself. I'd like pick one out of the jar and open it and record myself answering it, and have like my little timer off to the side and stuff too. And I would put the timer on the screen, because in real life that's also how it was, and it was kind of nerve-wracking seeing like that timer click down. But by kind of desensitizing myself to it, by doing it like simulating it on my computer, I felt a little bit more comfortable in the real thing. But then not just recording yourself, but like going back and watching it, as cringy as it is, but like analyzing, hey, like I think between those and then my practice or my mock interviews with my BeMo expert, I realized I like touch my face a lot, and I like play with my hair and all of those other things, and like super distracting things that were taking away from the words I was actually saying. And I would never have known that I did those things if I didn't, number one, record myself, and number two, work with my BeMo expert during those mock interviews. And I think that along with everything else, really contributed to the success I had during my interview cycle.
That's a really good point. I think a lot of people, when they start preparing for interviews, they're hyper focused on the contents and maybe even the structure of their answers to specific questions, sample questions, just like what you did. But equally important is the other aspects about the presentation, the nonverbal aspects. Because like you said, it's so hard to focus on what someone is saying when you're being distracted by their body language and what they're doing with their hands. So those are good things to keep in mind for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to know, so you talked about the group interview. What kind of advice did your BeMo consultant give you in terms of what to do with the group. It's a pretty different style that maybe there's not so many resources online to find out about.
When they said, you don't necessarily have to be the first one to speak during the group interviews. You don't necessarily like have to be the leader during the group interviews. And to like, one big thing that my expert talked about was talking out loud, like talking through my thought process out loud rather than thinking it all in my head and then just coming to an answer. Because it's like we got told in like 5th grade math, like you have to show your work. And it's even more important during these interviews because they're trying, if you interview at a school that has a group interview, they're looking at how you problem solve and how you work with others. So by literally not any thought that comes in your head, like filter a little bit, but like when you're solving the problems, talk out loud like what steps you're going through and any ideas that you have, even if they're not the best ideas, they're still ideas, and they'll give someone else something to like springboard off of to be able to maybe come to the final answer you're going to present. But like little things like that where maybe it wasn't completely obvious that you don't have to be the first one or the only one like talking and coming up with ideas, and it's not necessarily the person who talks the most that is gonna get the acceptance. And I think the biggest piece of advice that I got was they're not looking at this group of people and saying, oh, okay, only 2 of them are going to get in. Everyone in the group has the equal propensity to get in, or the equal possibility to get in. And there have been instances where they accept the whole group because they just see how well people work together. So it's not a competition, I think was probably the best advice that I got.
Absolutely. I think when you're in a group, you win when your group succeeds, right? At arriving at the answer, if there is one, or arriving at a solution to the problem that you're given. And just like you said, you don't have to feel like you have to be talking the whole time to be the leader. A lot of the times being the leader means giving a voice to others in your group. So I've even told students, for example, that if they notice that someone has something to offer, but maybe hasn't been given the opportunity to voice their opinion or their contribution in the group, you could be the one to say, hey, I think so-and-so has something to say about this topic. And that says a lot about you and the way that you interact and collaborate with other people. So yeah, definitely. In group interviews, you don't know what the problem or the challenge is going to be, but there are those general principles that you can familiarize yourself with so that you can be an effective collaborator, contributor in that group setting, for sure.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And so clearly you succeeded. That really strange 3-part interview was the one that ultimately you accepted an offer at. So I want to ask you if you have one piece of advice that you would want to give your younger self before you were going through all of this, or any candidates who are starting to prepare for their interviews.
Yeah, I'll talk. I think my biggest advice for like myself and especially like non-traditional candidates as well is to just be, I know it's cliche, but be yourself in these interviews, in your applications, because sometimes the thing that you find like weirdest about yourself, or that you're like, oh, that has absolutely like no place on like my application. Like for me, it was during quarantine, I got really into like building furniture and like woodworking. And I think I accidentally like let that slip during my brainstorming session, and my BeMo expert was like, oh my God, you have to put that on there. I'm like, there's no way. Like, oh my God, it's a medical school interview. But no, like every single one of my interviewers brought that up and they wanted to talk about it and like hear about that. And it's those things that make you different that are the things that are going to make you stand out the most. So whether you're traditional, non-traditional, and especially non-traditional, like lean into your previous career, lean into the things that you've learned from it, and that it's not necessarily like that you might miss it, and that's okay. They're not going to say, oh, this person you know, is going to miss their career. They're obviously not dedicated to medical school. No, like talk about the positive aspects from it and the things that you've learned that are going to make you not only a better medical student at their school, but also the things that are going to translate into your future as a physician. So whether you came from like engineering or you worked at like a desk job, find those things that make you unique and just highlight those and find a way to tie those into the overall theme of your application. And also don't let anyone tell you that you're too old or that you're too stuck in your ways to like apply to medical school. No, don't listen to them. Like just do it. Like what's the worst that could happen? Like you are absolutely going to be someone like all of those experiences you have from your previous life are things that are potentially going to help like future patients and future medical professionals, and you should absolutely go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a quick question about after your interviews, did you send thank you letters or anything else?
Yeah, so I sent I didn't do the letters because like COVID, I was like, yeah, it's kind of weird. So I sent emails, which I feel like is what a lot of medical students are doing these days, where I didn't ask for their email in the interview because that's weird. Just get their name and you can go to like the school website and you'll be able to find their email from there usually. If not, there's usually like an interview day coordinator that you can reach out to and just say, hey, my name is Allison. I interviewed with so-and-so today. Was just wondering if I could get their email. And that's like a really like clean and suave way to do it. And so whenever I emailed my interviewers, I just kept it short and sweet and really was overall like respectful of their time. It was just like, hey, I interviewed with you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. Insert like small, like either funny thing or like unique thing that we talked about that day that maybe tied to one of their passions or something that they were super interested in, just to kind of remind them who I was. And then like, thank you so much. And yeah, sign your name and that's it. Don't write like your life story. Don't end it with like, I've known someone before that ended it with like looking forward to seeing you next year, or like something like really bold like that. Don't do that. It does not come off as like brave or whatever. Just be respectful of their time and just thanking them for taking the time out of, I'm sure, their really busy day to sit and listen to why you wanted to go to their medical school.
Nice.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're nearing the end of this interview. So I wanted to just ask boldly, how many acceptances did you end up receiving?
I did not fully keep track because once I figured out what school I wanted to go to and I got in there, like that was my main focus. But I think I got into where anywhere between like 6 and 7 acceptances.
Congratulations.
Amazing. Yes.
So as a final question, so you already sort of talked about this a little bit with the interviews, but is there one thing that you would want to say to future applicants who might be nervous about the whole application and, you know, maybe thinking that they don't have what it takes to apply, they have something on their record, or for whatever reason, they're not sure that they should be applying?
I would say, like, first and foremost, if you have something on your record or you think that for some reason schools don't want you, if you do, like, never hear back from a school or get, like, quote unquote, like, rejected because of that, just know that, like, you're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you. And if they're not interested in someone that made a mistake in the past and has overcome that and come all of this way, like, why the heck would you want to go to school there, right? Like, you want a school that is going to build you up and take you for who you are and help turn you into someone that's going to influence people's, like, your future patients' lives. And if you're on the fence about applying, like, just, oh my God, stay off of Reddit, stay off of Student Doctor Network for like all of these like scary questions. Just know that like there are people out there that Like there are multiple people that I've met that have gotten into medical school with something on their record, not necessarily just like an academic violation, but even like some legal stuff as well. Like there are people that overcome those obstacles, and it's not going to be easy, but it is absolutely doable. It's all about how you paint yourself, how you carry yourself, and yeah, like absolutely go for it, and don't let the student doctor network scaries stop you.
That's really great advice. If you're motivated to do this and this is something you're truly passionate about through the activities that you've been engaging in and through self-discovery, then you should go for it. Don't let anything stop you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we would like to thank you very much, Allison, for sharing your journey with us and with everyone else. We really appreciate it, and we can see that you're actually in school right now, and I know that you actually have an anatomy test coming up in 20 minutes. So thank you very much for taking the time out to talk with us and to share your journey with everyone, because I know it's going to be really helpful for them. And thank you, Meng, as well, my co-host. And for anyone out there, if you have any questions about how BeMo can help you, just go to bemofreestrategy.com to book your free initial consultation today. And thank you for joining us.